I'm Dave Cook of Web Infused. For the last several years, I've been traveling the country teaching people how to get employed. I've specifically worked with our veterans. I teach a model of employment called reward over risk. Today, I'd like to share with you the basics of that model and get you started. Statistics are telling us that it's not necessarily the most qualified people getting jobs today. That changed sometime in the early 2000s. The people getting jobs today are the people who present the greatest reward for the least amount of risk. Let's talk about that a little bit. Why are the most qualified people not getting jobs? Quite often, the most qualified candidates create a perceived risk on the part of the employer. And that risk is, are they going to stay on the job long enough to recover the costs involved in hiring and training them? You may be asking, what costs are you talking about? Well, let's break them down a little bit. We're talking about the costs involved in hiring. Well, somebody has to write a job description. Either you do it yourself or you hire a service to do it for you. Typically, most corporations require that you review that with your legal counsel. With a number of lawsuits involved in hiring and firing, it's become just part of the game. The cost of advertising, the cost of background checks, the cost of going through the huge amount of paperwork involved in hiring an employee would probably stagger your imagination. Somebody has to review the resumes when they come in. Somebody has to organize and file them. Somebody has to go through those resumes and decide which candidates are going to be called in for interviews, which candidates are going to have background checks. How much are you going to spend on background checks? Somebody has to schedule the interviews, first, second, third, fourth, fifth interviews. Sometimes there's testing involved. Sometimes there's certification. Sometimes there are other documents. I think it surprises a lot of us to find out that the cost of hiring an employee in the United States can range between $4,000 and $16,000. Sometimes it's a little cheaper and sometimes it's a lot more expensive depending on the job. And on top of that, we add the cost of training, which can be a staggering number depending on the kind of job. Even a job working at a fast food restaurant can have a staggering cost associated to the training. The amount of time it takes from another staff member, the amount of time it takes to schedule, the amount of time to make sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed so the employee is capable of performing a job. If I hire an employee, I'm going to also be required to set aside probably around 20% more to pay the other costs involved in employing them. I'm also going to be required to pay for their Obamacare insurance if they work more than 28 hours. It wouldn't be out of line to set aside $65,000 a year to pay a $50,000 a year salaried employee. Now the question you have to ask yourself is, are you worth it? Can you prove it? Can you help that employer recover the costs involved in hiring and employing you? Because the people getting employed today are proving that they're a greater reward than they are risk. You have to be a greater reward than you are risk. That's all for this time in the Web Infused Employment Corner. Next time we'll be talking a little bit more about this process and how to increase your reward and reduce your risk.